Vivavus CCM is about to self-assess its performance on Eligibility Requirement 5. Your role as a consultant will be to guide the CCM and facilitate discussions and use of the CCM self-assessment tool. Ensure the CCM members involved in the assessment understand the principles behind the eligibility requirement, as well as the Global Fund standards and recommendations related to CCM membership and representation. Ask 2 volunteers to read out the principle and the full denomination of the eligibility requirement, taking turns.
Principle: ensuring an inclusive and meaningful representation in CCM composition.
CCM eligibility requirement. The Global Fund requires all CCM members representing non-government constituencies to be selected by their own constituencies based on a documented, transparent process developed within each constituency. This requirement applies to all non-government members, including those members under Requirement 4, but not to multilateral and bilateral partners.
In the same manner as Eligibility Requirement 4, Eligibility Requirement 5 challenges established positions and relations. It may generate feelings of unease among some non-government CCM members, as the legitimacy of their representation is discussed, if not examined. As a facilitator, you will need to refer to the Global Fund core principles and introduce or remind CCM members of the benefits of legitimate representation. Once the principles and the rationale for the eligibility requirement are understood, take the CCM members through the assessment process, ER by ER, MS by MS. Ask a volunteer to read out Eligibility Requirement J.
All non-governmental constituencies represented on the CCM selected their representatives on their own through a transparent and documented process.
Then ask another volunteer to read out the indicator.
Dated meeting minutes from each civil society constituency documenting the process it followed to select its representative or representatives on the CCM.
Ask a volunteer to read the examples of criteria for compliance assessment.
Non-compliant. CCM does not have any documentation that proves transparent and inclusive process of selecting civil society representatives, or the documentation is incomplete or insufficient for the majority of cases. Indeterminate compliance. CCM has complete documentation for 50 to 89% of cases that proves transparent and inclusive process of selecting civil society representatives. Fully compliant. For more than 90% of cases, the CCM has complete documentation of transparent and inclusive process of selecting civil society representatives.
Mark a pause and encourage CCM members to discuss and self-assess. Vivavus civil society members may submit the minutes of their election meetings, proceedings. Ideally, they should also submit endorsement letters by their constituency members. In Vivavus' case, the CCM may want to consider the availability of minutes of election proceedings for civil society members as evidence of a fully compliant rating. Your role as a facilitator will be to sensitize CCM members to the full requirements, which are 1. Having a complete documentation, i.e. for no less than 90% of the 16 civil society members. 2. A transparent and inclusive selection process. This second requirement will be assessed by reading the available documentation and confirmed through interviews of CCM and non-CCM representatives of civil society. At the end of the discussion, through your facilitation, Vivavus CCM may realize that its performance is closer to indeterminate compliance, than fully compliant due to limited documentation and transparency and inclusiveness issues during the various selection processes. In this column, you may encourage the CCM to input information which explains the rating. For example, limited understanding of the full implications of the ER, lack of funding to organize constituency-based election processes, or resistance of incumbent representatives to rotation, as well as corrective actions such as organization of new election processes, bearing in mind that the improvement plan will allow the CCM to capture all performance improvement measures. Ask a volunteer to read out the minimum standard K. Ask a volunteer to read out the minimum standard K. Then ask another volunteer to read out the indicator.
The CCM membership shows that national civil society sector representatives constitute at least 40% of membership.
Ask a volunteer to read the examples of criteria for compliance assessment.
Non-compliant. National civil society sector representatives make up less than 40% of CCM membership, and there are no plans for CCM composition change and/or membership renewal in the current year. Indeterminate compliance. National civil society sector representatives make up less than 40%, but composition change and/or membership renewal is planned in the current year. Fully compliant. National civil society sector representatives make up at least 40% of CCM membership.
Mark a pause and encourage CCM members to discuss and self-assess. Vivavu's CCM may submit its membership list as well as the CCM reform report to support its self-ascribed rating. The 16 civil society members of Vivavu's 45-member CCM represent 35% of the CCM membership, which is below the 40% threshold. Vivavu's CCM is therefore likely to self-assess as indeterminate compliant. Before confirming this rating, you as a facilitator will need to draw the CCM's attention to two main aspects of the eligibility requirement. First of all, the 40% proportion relates to the national civil society sector. International NGOs based in Vivavu and members of its CCM do not count as part of the national civil society sector. The 35% in Vivavu's case may actually be less in that regard. Secondly, the indeterminate compliance rating can only be ascribed when there are actual plans for membership renewal in the current year. If there are no such plans, the performance should be non-compliant. In this column, you may encourage the CCM to enter information explaining the rating, for instance, increased total of CCM members, lack of awareness of this eligibility requirement among national civil society organizations, or failure of national civil society organizations to secure more seats, as well as corrective actions such as membership renewal to be included in the improvement plan. Ask a volunteer to read out minimum standard L.
CCM has clearly defined processes of soliciting inputs from and providing feedback to their constituencies that selected them to represent their interests in the CCM.
Then ask another volunteer to read out the indicator.
Each civil society representative on the CCM has a work plan for their constituency that specifies key tasks and communication responsibilities which they need to fulfil as a representative of the constituency.
Ask a volunteer to read the examples of criteria for compliance assessment.
Non-compliant. Less than 80% of civil society representatives on the CCM have a work plan endorsed by their constituency. Indeterminate compliance. The majority of civil society representatives on the CCM are in the process of developing a work plan, and/or work plans have not yet been endorsed by their constituency. Fully compliant. More than 80% of civil society representatives on the CCM have a work plan endorsed by their constituency.
Mark a pause and encourage CCM members to discuss and self-assess. Vivavo's CCM members from civil society organizations may submit their work plans, email communication with their respective constituencies prior to or after CCM meetings, and minutes of constituency meetings where Global Fund and CCM matters have been discussed. Your role as a facilitator will be to share with the civil society members of the Vivavo CCM that being elected through a constituency-based, transparent and documented process is not the end goal of CCM membership and representation. In addition, at least 80% of civil society representatives in the CCM have to have developed a work plan that specifies key tasks and communication responsibilities which they need to fulfill as a representative of the constituency. Such work plans will also need to be endorsed by their constituency. If less than 80% of the 16 civil society members have such work plans, the CCM performance is non-compliant. If the majority of the 16 civil society members are developing such work plans and intend to have them endorsed by their constituencies, Vivavo's performance can be rated as indeterminate compliance. In this column, you may encourage the CCM to input information which explains the rating. For example, limited awareness of the eligibility requirement and of the need to have a work plan endorsed by constituencies, limited understanding of what types of activities should be included in the work plans, or need for help in developing such work plans, as well as corrective actions to be included in the improvement plan. Ask a volunteer to read out minimum standard M.
The CCM elects its chair and vice chair or vice chairs from different sectors, such as government, national civil society and development partners, and also follows good governance principles of periodic change and rotation of leadership according to CCM bylaws.
Then ask another volunteer to read out the indicator.
The CCM membership details shows that the CCM chair and vice chair are from different sectors: government, national civil society sector, and development partners. And there are clear procedures for rotation as well as periodic change of the leadership.
Ask a volunteer to read the examples of criteria for compliance assessment.
Non-compliant. The CCM chair and vice chair are from the same sector. Indeterminate compliance. The CCM chair and vice chair are from different sectors, but no procedures for rotation or periodic change of leadership are applied. Fully compliant. The CCM chair and vice chair are from different sectors and clear procedures for rotation as well as periodic change of leadership are applied.
Mark a pause and encourage CCM members to discuss and self-assess. Vivavo's CCM may include its CCM bylaws, governance manual, and the CCM reform report if it contains proposed changes regarding the functioning of the CCM. In Vivavo's case, the CCM chair and vice chair respectively represent the government, Ministry of Health, and civil society. Vivavo's CCM will therefore be inclined to assess its performance as indeterminate compliance. While confirming this rating, your role as a facilitator will be to lead CCM members to reflect on how long the division of leadership has stayed the same within the CCM and on how long each incumbent has held his or her position. Find out whether or not the CCM bylaws and or governance manual include provision for rotation of leadership. If not, discuss the relevance of rotation of leadership. If yes, discuss on the reasons why the status quo has been maintained for so long. In this column, you may encourage the CCM to input information which explains the rating, such as limited awareness of the ER, need for stability, as well as corrective actions such as leadership renewal to be included in the improvement plan.